Seneca pulled the teddy bear head down over her face. It felt surprisingly heavy and thick, almost like a real fur hat would feel. But this one was bright purple with faux hair, a day-glow pink nose, and coloring along the inside of the ears. Catcalls followed as she posed and preened, giggling. "Slut!" one girl yelled. "Work that little ass!" another said. She'd received the strange text earlier that afternoon. Her literature professor at Clawson and Sampson Junior College for Girls had sent out a mass text to her entire class that asked them all to meet him in their classroom at 8 p.m. sharp. As if this text wasn't odd enough, coming from her teacher on a Saturday night, Mr. Pillinghast had been on a personal leave of absence for the past 2 months after the sudden death of his wife. Weirder still, when the girls showed up at 8, Mr. P was nowhere to be found. The door to the classroom, however, was unlocked. Seneca and several others had let themselves in, only to find the room empty. What they found inside proved to be strangest of all. Strewn about the room were dozens and dozens of little plushy stuffed animals, in the chairs, atop the desks, lying on the floor. The various kittens, puppies, birdies, reptiles, and assorted farm animals looked as though they'd been haphazardly tossed into the room with haste. But even more bizarre, laying across Mr. P's desk were a dozen life-sized, day-glow-colored, plushy animal costumes, complete with oversized heads that fit in such a way as to leave the person's head sticking out of the animal's mouth as though they'd been swallowed whole, with only their face remaining visible within the animal's open maw. Along with the heads came matching full-body costumes, paw booties, and gloves. The girls had squealed and fought over the outfits, but Seneca managed to get a hold of the big purple teddy bear before anyone else. Purple was her favorite color, and she still had a huge collection of plushy teddy bears at home from when she was a kid. Monica, Seneca's best friend, put on a pink fuzzy cat head. It had pointy ears and big cute googly eyes that shook every time Monica shook her head. The remaining girls, 10 in all, grabbed up the rest of the costumes consisting of bunnies, birds, puppies, mice, and various other cute, plushy animals. "I wonder what Mr. P wants to talk to us about," Jamie, a preppy cheerleader with long auburn hair, said to Seneca once the group had settled down. "I don't know, but I hope it's to tell us he's coming back," Seneca said, sniffing the purple paw in her right hand. It had a faint, sweet smell that she couldn't quite place. "Fuck that," said Kelly, a punkish girl with a mohawk of long black dreadlocks that hung back in a ponytail. The sides of her head were shaved and tattooed. She was the best poetry writer in the class, but her poems were always morbid and way too sexual for Seneca. "Mr. Humongous is a way better teacher." His name wasn't really Mr. Humongous. The girls called him that because he had an unmistakable huge bulge in the front of his trousers when he lectured the class. "You're just saying that because you want to suck his big fat cock," Monica said, making lewd blowjob motions with her hand and tongue. The others burst out in giggles. Kelly's face flushed red, but she did not deny the accusation, instead choosing to cover her embarrassed face with the big floppy ears from her puppy costume while she giggled uncontrollably. "I hope he gets here soon. My boyfriend's coming over later," Amanda said. "Did anyone see his car in the parking lot?" "Nope," Seneca said. "Just a weird-ass rusted-out RV. Maybe Mr. P has been living off the land." Amanda shuddered, visibly. "He always did give me the creeper vibe." "Hey, what's this?" another girl asked, after the laughter died down. This one wore a bright yellow tutu with a large poofy bird tail trailing out behind it, her tiny face almost hidden within the huge beak of her bird hat. She picked up a thick manuscript from the desk that had previously been covered by the costumes, which the girls now wore. The cover read, simply, "Cotton Candy." Seneca snatched the manuscript from the other girl's hands. She plopped down in a chair next to the huge window overlooking the main campus gathering area below. In fact, the entire building, which housed the English department, was one big window. Some eco-friendly Greenpeace architect had designed it in such a way as to harness as many glass panels as possible in order to conserve electricity. 2 walls and the entire ceiling of the classroom were windows from top to bottom, side to side. The moonlight was not quite high enough in the sky to illuminate the entire room, but there was enough for Seneca to comfortably see what she was reading. Monica and the other girls crowded around her, their curious questions filling the air. What is it? Who wrote it? What's it about? Shut the fuck up, Seneca said, annoyed. She turned the page, scanned it, turned a few more, and then gasped. What? Monica whined, dying to be let in on Seneca's new little secret. It's written by Mr. P. The girl started to giggle again. It's addressed to us. The girl shrieked and tried to pull the manuscript from Seneca's hands. Back off, she said. I'll fucking read it out loud, Jesus. Seneca loved being the center of attention. She loved even more holding this kind of power over the other girls. Excited, she turned back to page 1 and started reading out loud. First, she read in a comical voice, imitating and exaggerating the uptight and impersonal academic tone of their professor. But soon enough, as the story became more and more bizarre, she dropped the mocking act and simply read the story for what it was. This is what she read. Girls, I apologize for the unorthodox method with which I've chosen to contact you after my unfortunate time away from the classroom. I assure you there is absolute and sound reasoning for my calling on you this particular day at this particular time. But in order for you to fully understand this reasoning, you must understand what awful fate has so recently befallen your dear teacher. What follows is absolute truth. Of that fact, there is no question. This manuscript is a chronicling of the events of the past 2 months of my life, and, I must warn you now, they are not for the weak of heart. The description of my ordeal will be raw and extremely graphic. I simply know of no other way to express into words the morbid, carnal, and bizarre parody that has become my life. Lest you misunderstand my intentions, though, let me reiterate the fact that I did not write this chronicle as a confession of sins, but rather as a simple distraction from ever-increasing and obsessive thoughts that I cannot bear to act upon. Thoughts which are still, even now, driving me slowly mad. Read further at your own risk. My first life ended with the sudden and unexpected death of my dearly beloved wife, Susanna. As some of you know, she and I were married for 43 years. Susanna was everything to me, my anchor, my conscience. She is the person who pushed me to pursue academia as a career. She made the decision for us to focus our lives on our careers rather than having children of our own. Our place, she often said, is to help the children already in this world. Enriching the lives of hundreds versus those of 2 or 3 biologically inclined was to her a humanitarian gesture of the highest order. That was Susanna, selfless, altruistic to a fault, always practical and calculating the best odds. It's no wonder she became a math teacher. The aneurysm took her from me swiftly and without pity. Only 10 minutes before, we'd texted about dinner. Then I got the phone call. Life is a merciless mistress. After the funeral, I was lost. It was weeks before I could even sleep in our bedroom, in our bed that we'd shared for 4 long decades. It did not, I'm ashamed to say, take that long before the itch started in the recesses of my subconscious mind. Susanna, for all her saintly qualities, unfortunately did not possess any semblance of a sex drive. I did not allow her frigidness to bother me. She was too good a woman to hold such a trivial thing against. I pleasured myself manually in the shower whenever the urge presented itself, which, in all honesty, it rarely ever did. That is, until Susanna died. When I said she was my anchor and conscience, I was not speaking merely in a romantic or metaphorical way. I felt an intense freedom after her passing, a freedom that scared me down to my deepest core. Susanna decided to become a vegetarian, so I became a vegetarian. Susanna loved classical music, so I filled my album collection with only the greatest composers. She was raised a strict Catholic, so I attended Mass twice weekly. Before she'd been in the ground 48 hours, I was eating cheeseburgers, listening to Dylan and Elvis as loudly as I wanted in my study, dancing and singing, eating awful food, drinking cheap whiskey. I was like a teenager again. I was the kid I'd been before Susanna came into my life. At 62 years old, I'd found the self I never knew I'd lost. That's when the itch started. That's when everything went horribly and irreversibly wrong. That's when my second life began. Susanna had frowned upon watching too much television, said it was lazy man's entertainment. That the intellectuals read books. I love books, but after she died, I could not concentrate on my reading. I couldn't keep my mind from racing back through gulfs of time spent with the most wonderful woman I'd ever met. I needed a distraction. I flipped through the channels, mindlessly at first, welcoming the droll hum of the television set in the study. Soon enough, I stopped on one of the cable channels. A suspense thriller was more than halfway into its murder, sex, lies, and stunning twist plot lines. I let my mind relax, gorged myself on someone else's drama, and then the blonde bombshell murderess seduced our grizzled detective lead. She ripped off her tiny dress, revealed her perfect breasts, and moaned in ecstasy as the hard-boiled cop took her from behind. At that moment, I came alive. The vague stirrings flamed up into a house fire of carnal lust. My cock went utterly rigid in my pants to the point of demonstrable pain. I had to unleash him. Words cannot describe my excitement as I took my flesh into my hand for the first time outside of the comfortable solitude of my shower in more than 40 years. I stroked as the cop thrust. I moaned as the blonde screamed in ecstasy. The three of us, we climaxed together in some weird, vicarious, late-night cable TV menage a trois. It was, without a doubt, the best orgasm of my life. I was lightheaded as I switched off the television. I scooted myself, pants around ankles, to the study couch and collapsed, falling fast asleep, still stewing in my own sticky juices. The next morning, I awoke feeling refreshed, invigorated even, but more than anything else, horny as hell. I masturbated once before even leaving the couch. Again after a morning piss. I masturbated through 7 phone calls from bereaved colleagues, family members, and close friends. Thank you for your condolences, fap, fap, fap. She was a great woman. She'll truly be missed, fap, fap, fap. I don't know what I'll do without her, fap, fap, fap. What I did was jack off every day, all day, until my penis was chafed, raw, and aching. I didn't put pants on again for an entire week, and only then with reluctance. I simply had become unsatisfied with cable TV sex. I craved more. I'd unleashed a beast within myself, and that beast was hungry. I'd never viewed pornography before. Not unless you count half-crumbled Playboy pictorials quietly passed around middle school playgrounds. I did, however, know where to purchase it. I don't own a personal computer, nor would I know how to operate the machine if I were to buy one. I remain deliciously old school in that regard. So the deluge of internet pornography remains outside of my grasp. Susanna, though, had chaired a church protest group that attempted to stop a sex toy and boutique shop called Hottest Topics from opening in our neighborhood. Her failure was my blessing. My sweet, obscene, pornographic blessing. My first trip into the store was terrifying. I was the only patron in the place, and yet, even with only one bored clerk reading a magazine behind the counter, I felt like the entire world was watching me, judging me. I passed the wall of enormous dildos and the racks of tiny lingerie toward the movie wall in the far corner. I was too embarrassed to even look fully at all of the naked bodies engaging in acts and positions I'd never even dreamed of. I quickly grabbed a movie from the shelf without even looking at the title, and I purchased it. I became even more embarrassed when I had to ask the clerk what kind of playback device I needed in order to play the offending film. He was extremely gracious and helpful, pointing out that I could buy a television set with built-in DVD player so I wouldn't have to mess with any sorts of wires or assemblies. I masturbated to the disc 32 times before deciding that a midget sleeping with obese women was probably not my thing, as it were. Over the next month, I purchased over 40 pornographic films, reveling in the carnal nasties and perverted lust, the clinically graphic visual stimulation in a way I'd never experienced anything before. Keep in mind, my excitement for the week normally consisted of completing the New York Times crossword puzzle. I was drunk on pornography, but soon mere masturbation was not enough. And herein, girls, lies my great folly, my descent into degradation, depravity, and ultimate humiliation, and in time, absolute terror. But I digress. Soon, Susanna's death was but a slight memory. I'd begun to purchase sex toys from the store, using them on myself as I tasted more and more of that forbidden fruit of my awakened sexuality. One day, I watched all oral compilation films, stuffing myself with images of fat cocks sliding in and out of plump female mouths, ultimately losing their seed on gorgeous faces and into eager mouths. Over 4 hours of beautiful women sucking the male root dry. As I did so, I pleasured myself with a rubber pocket sex toy shaped to resemble the human mouth. The next day, bondage films were the order of the day, while I wore a ball gag and nipple clamps, withholding orgasm after orgasm with tight cock rings designed to prolong my erections. I continued this way, barely eating, barely sleeping for days on end. I was binging on fleshy excess. I made my way through all available sexual fetish categories at the porn shop. All female, threesomes, all anal, bisexual, transsexual, pregnant women, fat women, old women, young women. I fucked myself retarded with all manner of pocket pussies, dildos, pocket assholes, butt plugs, cock rings, stingers, poppers. I cleaned out the porn shop, but it was not enough. It was never enough. The beast was insatiable. I purchased an escort, made love to her in all of the newfound positions and creative motions that pornography had so recently taught me, right there in Susanna's house, before the dirt on her grave had yet to even settle. Then I bought 2, fucking them both in the bed I'd shared with my beloved for more years than I had not. One pissed in my mouth, while the other shit on my plastic-wrap-covered chest in the very spot Susanna had kneeled to pray for the entirety of her adult life. Still it wasn't enough. Never enough. The beast needed more. I'd become a sexual deviant of the highest order in less time than it took most men to complete their first alcoholic binge. Worse still, I was no longer ashamed of it. I owned my perversions, wore them proudly like an expensive suit made of butt plugs. When my neighbor, the old widow Masters, saw me walking my escorts out of the house early the next morning, I smiled and waved at her. Most men, upon losing their wife to illness late in life, would buy a dog, plant a garden, participate in social mixers. I fucked prostitutes in the ass. Still, as out of control as my obsession had become, I was not without morality. The only line I refused to cross sexually was with animals and children. The innocent need not suffer for my sins. Through all of this, my love affair with pornography had not ended. I still watched fuck movies more times per day than I ate or shit. My favorite porno fetish, after nearly 2 months of this decadent, lascivious lifestyle, turned out to be the gangbang. There was just something preternatural about all of those rock-hard cocks violating one small woman. Something about one girl's ability to take all of those sticky, white cum shots that turned my crank like nothing else. I was insatiable, and yet the gangbang eluded me in real life. I could hire all the hookers I could ever fuck 10 times over. Susanna's life insurance policy, coupled with our modest lifestyle and frugal spending, had left me with a considerable savings. And yet, I could not just invite my friends or colleagues over for afternoon tea. Oh, by the way, fellas, Janice here is going to take our cocks in all of her holes and then slurp our man-seed down with all the enthusiasm of a starving Ethiopian. See you at noon! No, the gangbang would be tricky. I was vaguely aware of clubs which catered to the swinger audience, but it was my rudimentary understanding that single gentlemen were discouraged from attending such events. Besides, as proud as I'd become of my newly awakened sexuality, I did not want to risk my tenure at the college being spotted at such a questionable establishment. My frequent visits to Hottest Topics were already pushing it. Then, one afternoon, while swapping DVDs at said porno shop, the clerk, whom I now knew as Samuel, dropped his magazine and called out to me by name when I entered the store. "Mr. P!" His face lit up with excitement. Samuel had taken a liking to me over the course of my descent into debauchery. Slowly, over the period of time I'd been visiting the store, I'd opened up to the young man. His dyed, spiky black hair, his ridiculously large-gauged earplugs, his 7 lip rings, and his satanic pentagram t-shirts all added credence to the feeling that my lewd acts and obsessive pornography consumption were abhorrent and taboo. I wanted to feel abhorrent and taboo. Life was so much better when lived this way. So much more flavorful and satisfying. We'd discussed Susanna's death, my former puritanical lifestyle, my newfound hobby of being shit on by prostitutes, even my teaching position at the university. Samuel approved of my second life. He fancied himself a bit of a writer. I'd offered to read some of his work as thanks for helping guide my path toward darkness and depravity. Mostly, I think he was amused by the enthusiastic old pervert patronizing his store several days a week, sometimes twice in the same day, in fact. "Hello, Samuel," I said, returning his smile as I set down the entire catalog of I Gangbang DVDs, issues 1 through 37, on the counter. "Dude, have I got something for you? I almost called you this afternoon, but I figured you'd wander in here sooner or later." "What is it, son?" I chuckled, always eager to see what new sex toy or movie he'd found for me to play with. "Well," he said, writing me up a store credit for my returned movies, "you're not going to believe this, but remember our conversation yesterday about how hard it would be to get in on an actual gangbang?" I'd vented my frustrations to him. He was my porno priest, always willing to hear my deepest, darkest sins and desires, always ready to hand out retribution. Bless you, my son. Say 5 anal bukkakis, 6 barely legal cum sluts, 4 big black buttholes, and all will be forgiven. Samuel was my savior, and finally, appropriately, my damnation. "I remember," I said. "Well, after you left, I jumped online and checked Craigslist and several other forums trying to hunt you down a group of dudes willing to let you get your fuck on, but I couldn't come up with anything. Gangbang dudes are a picky bunch, apparently." I had no idea what he was talking about, but I got the gist of what he meant. The internet held no interest for me that I could not find in a book or journal. The thought of sitting in front of that artificial glow, squinting and clicking my life away, made my stomach crawl. "But," he said, features lighting up in excitement, "then a really, and I mean really creepy little dude came in here and posted this on the all-pervert board." The pervert board was a bulletin board that hung against a wall in the back of the DVD room. On it, people could post anonymous hookup messages back and forth until they felt comfortable meeting in person. It was populated mostly by messages from men, and most of those men received mostly no response. But this was different. This was an advertisement, a flyer for a party, a gangbang party. It was written in crude handwriting, obviously Xerox copied. It read, "Ever wanted to gangbang a real girl? Now's your chance. Call 555-8765. Under the note was a stick-figure girl surrounded by giant cocks with big, smiling, happy faces drawn on them. Obviously, I was interested, but something was off about the flyer. Something that smacked of suspicion. And then there was the smell. "Like fucking cotton candy, eh?" Samuel said. "He didn't say a word to me. Just tacked up the little flyer and then scurried out of here like he was terrified to be noticed. And after he left, the whole goddamn place reeked of cotton candy. It smelled like a carnival in here. I swear to God, I went home craving funnel cake." "I want to call him," I said, and then added, "Should I call him?" Even though I'd already made up my mind the moment I'd laid eyes on those smiling, happy cocks. Samuel shook his head. No, Mr. P, I just wanted to show you the fucking thing." I looked at him and smiled. Oh, fuck! He understood his folly then. Understood perfectly well that he could have told me he'd seen the man positively identified by the FBI on the 6 o'clock news of serial murdering perverted old school teachers, and it wouldn't have softened the steel boner in my pants in that moment. My happy, smiling steel boner. "Jesus, just be careful, Mr. P. You have no idea what kind of crazy shit you're about to get yourself into." Had I only listened to his warning. Had I only heeded that simple bit of advice. But of course, I did not. I phoned the number as soon as I got home, after waving to Mrs. Masters, who scowled at me disapprovingly from her garden sanctuary. There was no answer. I left my name and number on the voicemail, and then, much to my surprise, the phone rang back almost immediately. "Hello?"
"Mr. Pillingast?"
"Yes, that's me."
"You called, inquiring about the party?"
"Yes, I did," I said with no hesitation, my penis becoming engorged at the very thought of actually fulfilling my most perverted desire.
"We have very difficult standards to meet, Mr. Pillingast. Our parties are extremely exclusive."
"Money is of no concern. I'll pay whatever."
"No, Mr. Pillingast. Our parties are free of charge. Our requirements for participation are much more specific."
"I'll do anything," I said, my hands shaking. I had to be a part of this party. Had I been thinking rationally, I may have caught the blatant warning signs and red flags that the mysterious caller was showing. But I had tunnel vision, and rational thought rarely extends past a man's raging boner. I had to make this happen.
"Meet me at Cutter Park at noon tomorrow."
He hung up before I could reply. I showed up at the park at 11:30, giddy and eager. At 12:05, I became nervous. At 12:45, I began to doubt the mystery man's intent to show for our meeting. At 1:15, as I put my jacket on to leave, a small, squattish little man exited a filthy, beat-up old RV in the parking lot next to my bench where I sat. The RV had been parked there when I arrived.
"Mr. Pillingast, I assume?"
His voice was even weirder in person than on the phone, but that voice had nothing on the rest of his appearance. He resembled an overgrown frog. His eyes were huge, saucer-shaped things that jutted out of his oversized, balding head. They had an odd sheen to them, almost plastic in appearance. His nose was a pathetic little turned-up knob, while his mouth was so wide-set it suggested an almost legitimate deformity. His arms and legs were short, barely protruding from a brown suit that was too tight at the waist and much too long in the sleeves. "Yes, I was about to leave. You told me noon. Have you been here this whole time?"
"I had to test your commitment to our party,"
he said, grinning.
"So many men are eager to join in on the fun, but get cold feet at the last minute. I like to weed out the weak as soon as possible."
"I see," I said, sitting back down on the bench. My strange companion joined me. As he spoke, I could not help but notice the odd smell Samuel had mentioned before, almost like cotton candy.
"Are you married, Mr. Pillingast?"
"No, well, widowed."
condolences. Children?
No, we never had any children of our own.
Live alone?
Yes, but, I said, feeling slightly agitated by his line of questioning, what's any of that got to do with your party, as you keep calling it? I am interested in joining your group sex session. My personal life is irrelevant. I assure you, if discretion is your concern, I have not told anyone of my plans to attend the event and would not consider telling anyone. Your secret is safe with me. I hadn't, after all, actually told Samuel I was going to meet with him, so I wasn't technically lying. The little man smirked, unfazed by my sudden burst of anger.
We operate in a very specific way, Mr. Pillingast. I assure you, our discretionary tactics are in place for a reason. Please relax. If, however, you feel uncomfortable with my invasive questions, we can always end this interview now.
He made a move to leave. No, I'm sorry. I live alone and unmarried and have no dependents. I don't even so much as own a dog that will miss me while I'm gone. I am very interested in joining your group. What other information can I provide you with?
I will need a current negative test for sexually transmitted diseases and a record of your criminal history. When you've obtained these items, send them to this address and await further instructions.
He handed me a slip of paper with a P.O. box number. With that, he stood. Wait, I don't understand. If this isn't about money, why all the secrecy? What are you hiding from?
The young lady that employs me is not in need of any money. Her father is a wealthy and very prominent politician, so you can understand our need for discretion. He provides her with a lavish lifestyle, and in return she makes sure that her activities do not show her family name in an unfavorable light in the public eye.
Oh, I said, realizing that I hadn't, up to that point, given any consideration to the woman with whom I'd be sharing the encounter with. I see.
Mail the items to the P.O. box, Mr. Pillingast. I'll be in touch.
I did as requested. Samuel, upon hearing of the meeting, protested strongly against my participation, expressing regret at ever showing me the flyer in the first place. I paid no mind. I was a man possessed by the beast. Instead, I waited in anticipation for a return phone call every day, always making sure to keep my phone near me during my regular masturbation sessions, which now consisted of exclusively gangbang porn, as I fantasized about defiling this prominent young aristocrat along with half a dozen other smiling, happy cocks. After days of agonizing waiting, thinking surely that I'd spooked the little man in our meeting, or that my requested data did not meet his stringent requirements, the phone call came. I was instructed to meet the stranger at the North City bus station at 10 p.m. the next night with one change of clothing and nothing more. I was also instructed once again to not inform anyone of my business with the party planner, as he called himself. I hung up the phone and whooped. Just before leaving for the station, I stood in my den and reflected over what my life had become. Used sex toys, covered in shit and cum, lay strewn across the room. Empty pizza boxes, fast food bags, and liquor bottles littered the floor and every surface. My office, the room in which I'd done so much work to shape and enrich young lives, had become a literal den of iniquity. I could not remember the man I'd been before Susanna had so abruptly left my life. But I knew for certain that I loved the man I'd become. I left my house that night entirely at peace with myself, full of confidence even, ready to have the best sexual experience of my life. Little did I know, it would be my last. As I sat in my car at the bus station, I looked at my phone, contemplating whether or not I should text Samuel to let him know I was going through with it. In the end, I decided to comply with the party planner's wishes. I told no one. At 10 p.m. exactly, my phone buzzed with a new text. It read, "Bathroom. Third stall." I exited my car and complied with the request. What I found was a set of directions and an address. It was really happening. My pulse quickened with excitement as I climbed back into my car, plugging the numbers into my GPS with childlike glee. The address in question was in a small town 50 miles south called Hops Hollow. I'd heard of the town and its nefarious reputation for being one of the most haunted small towns on Earth, but I'd never had a reason to visit. The residence itself, it turned out, was actually several miles outside of Hops proper, near the top of a wooded bluff overlooking the Mississippi River. Even with the help of my electronic navigator, it took me several attempts to find the nearly hidden, unmarked drive. The narrow path was overgrown with vegetation and dense trees that made travel, even in my small vehicle, a tad bit challenging. Several times as I crept along, I wondered if I'd chosen the correct road. However, after a dozen yards, the tree line opened up, and I saw that I was indeed in the right place. The house itself was underwhelming. A centuries-old farmhouse that made up what it lacked in aesthetics with considerable size. It was a huge 3-story structure, albeit severely dilapidated and in need of serious repair. The estate was quite large, considering. It had obviously been a farm compound at some point, maybe 150 years or more in the past. Now, it was an overgrown graveyard of rusted-out farming equipment and old cars and trucks. The crude rock road wound around to the front of the house, ending in a circle drive where several other vehicles, including the weird RV I'd seen at my meeting with the party planner, were already parked. I took a spot behind the other cars shortly after 11 p.m. Full night had set in along my journey, the long summer night giving way to a brooding darkness. I inhaled the country smells, cow manure, wild grass, and somewhere in the distance the burning of leaves. The gothic surroundings set well with me. I felt right at home at this backwoods haunt. I felt right. It was really happening. I was really here. My palms were sweating from excitement. A knock at my window snapped me back out of my euphoric trance.
Hey, buddy, you here for the party?
I cracked my window a hair. Can I help you?
Yeah, no, I was just bored waiting for this shit to start.
The man stared, unmoving. It was clear he had no intentions of walking away. I opened my door again and joined him in the vast front yard.
Name's Vern,
he said, extending his hand. I shook it. People call me Mr. P. Vern was a hair taller than me, just shy of 6'4". His head was shaved. He was very tan and wore a silver hoop earring in each ear, and one stud in the middle of his lower lip, in addition to a mustacheless goatee. He was small-framed but muscular, and wore a tight-fitting black tank top, revealing half-sleeve tattoos down to his elbows. In short, he looked like a rock-and-roll Mr. Clean.
You ever done one of these before, Mr. P?
No, I replied, reluctant to converse with my newfound friend. Much like I'd previously failed to consider the woman involved in my gangbang fantasy, I was now faced with the reality that my fellow bangers were not simply crudely drawn cocks with happy, smiling faces.
Oh man, you're in for a treat,
Vern said, slapping me on the back.
Come on, I'll introduce you to the rest of the boys. I've met everybody already.
I'd rather... But he was already off, quickly walking toward a small group of men gathered on the huge screened-in front porch of the crumbling house. Awkwardly, I followed Vern. The screen door slammed, and we stepped inside. The porch was cluttered with knickknacks and old furniture. It looked as though nothing had been added to the little room in at least 30 years. I found that quite odd, considering the party planner himself looked to be no older than, at worst, late 40s. But then, I was making a huge assumption in thinking that this was his house. For all I knew, it belonged to one of the gangbangers. Still, it did not seem the kind of place one would find a kinky debutante with wealthy parents.
Mr. P, I'd like to introduce you to the gang,
Vern said, forcing my attention back to the business at hand.
Gang, this is Mr. P. He says he's never done a gangbang before. A noob.
We get to pop his cherry, a gigantic fat man said. He sat on what must have been a folding chair. I couldn't actually tell for sure because his obscene girth obscured the entire thing.
Well, that's Fat Bob,
Vern said. Fat Bob gave a slight wave. 2 hugely muscled men stepped forward, each as ripped and defined as the other. They were obviously bodybuilders. They wore no shirts. Both had shaved chests with bulging pectoral muscles and perfectly shaped abdominals. The only thing, in fact, that set them apart from one another was that one had closely cropped blonde hair while the other kept his long and slicked back in a ponytail. "I'm Kirk," the long-haired one said. "And I'm Bruce," added the other. I shook their hands. "Pleasure to meet you, fellows." "Oh, this is gonna be fun for you," Kirk said. "Yeah, you lucked out," Bruce chimed in with equal enthusiasm. "We're gonna show you big cum shots. Huge," Kirk said. "We blow the biggest loads, don't we, Bruce?" "Oh yeah, we drink cum shakes 6 times a day in preparation for blowing our loads," Bruce said. "Cum shakes?" I asked, puzzled. "An old family recipe," Kirk said. "A secret family recipe," Bruce added. "So, you two are related?" I asked. "Brothers," Kirk said, clasping Bruce's meaty forearm. "Brothers in cum," Bruce said. "Our dick blast will blow everybody else's out of the water. Yeah, because of our shakes and our all-natural diet, our sperm is thick. The thickest. And pure pearly white. Not that sickly yellow shit little weak men blow. And it smells organic and fresh, not like ammonia. Ooh, fuck that. And it tastes awesome, too. My brother's tastes like pineapple. His tastes like vanilla." I couldn't remember who was Kirk and who was Bruce by now. "You know what each other's cum tastes like?" "Yo, these niggas be on some straight-up homo shit." The brothers' cum were pushed aside. Between them strode a tiny black man in an ill-fitting t-shirt and shorts that hung down to the tops of his shoes. He couldn't have been more than 4.5 feet tall. A black midget. "Yo, don't listen to them. Name's Dennis, but everybody calls me Big D, and not 'cause my name's Dennis, 'cause of this." Before I could say a word, Big D dropped his shorts, revealing a thick cock that, once unleashed, hung all the way down to his feet. It had to be 14 inches. My mouth, it hung agape. "That's right," Big D said, waggling his monster schlong at me. "Respect the dick."
"It'd be more impressive if you could keep that big dick hard,"
said the next person to join our growing group. "Man, fuck you, Maxwell. You ain't even got a dick." "You little shit." Maxwell made a move to attack Big D. The little man stood his ground, brandishing his enormous wang like a weapon. Vern jumped between the two.
"Whoa, calm down, Maxwell."
Maxwell backed off, lighting a cigarette as he came over to stand next to me away from Big D, who added a "That's right, bitch," as the last word before returning to where Fat Bob sat across the small porch. "Pardon my asking, but do you two already know each other? I was under the impression that this was an anonymous party for random patrons."
"Him?"
Maxwell said, pulling another drag off his cigarette.
"Nah, not personally. Little fucker has a website for a while. Would fuck white chicks he found on the street with his huge dong. Problem is, he couldn't ever keep it up and had a hell of a time getting off, so his cum shots had to be faked most of the time. People caught on pretty quick and the site tanked. He's just pissed that I recognized him." "I see. So you learned of tonight's party from—" "Same way you did, I'm guessing. Little pink flyer, smiling cocks on it." I laughed. Yes, smiling cocks." "The cocks sold me on it too," he said, winking at me. What did he mean when he said you don't have a dick?" "I'm transgendered, female to male," he said, puffing out his chest. "I was just telling everyone about it when you walked in." I could see that there was something slightly off about the curve and softness of Maxwell's jawline, the thickness of his short, cropped beard, the delicate structure of his hands. But then I stammered, "How do you fuck?" He unbuttoned his jeans, reached in, and pulled out a fat 6-inch dick. I don't understand," I said, puzzled. Maxwell yanked the dick out of his pants and handed it to me.
Appalled, I juggled it around for a moment before holding it away from my body by the tips of my fingers. The dick and even the balls on the thing looked totally real, complete with a small tuft of pubic hair above the penis. Indeed, all that gave the nasty thing away as an imitation were the straps hanging off either side and a reddish jelly dildo that jutted out from the opposite side.
Cadaver dick,
Maxwell said.
Really comes, too. There's a piston in there that pushes semen out of the ball sack.
I handed it back to him after nearly dropping the whole bizarre contraption at the mention of the word cadaver.
Gentlemen,
the familiar voice of the party planner said from behind the group.
The hostess is ready to entertain her guests.
The creepy little man led us through the house into a sizable sitting room near the rear of the building. The inside looked considerably more kept than the dilapidated exterior, and yet still contained that puzzling, anachronistic air. All of the rugs, cabinets, and other furniture I saw as we were led through the house looked to be those that would have belonged to an elderly couple. There were rows and rows of cabinets filled with trinkets like ceramic angels and pewter cats. The floors were stacked high with bags of old newspapers and magazines. In fact, the house very much looked like that of dear Susanna's 89-year-old grandmother, still sharp as a tack. I did not have long to ruminate on such odd things, though, before we were ushered into the sitting room.
Your hostess will be with you in a moment,
the party planner said upon exit, closing the double doors behind him.
You ready to have some fun, Mr. P?
Vern asked, smacking me on the shoulder. I am, I said, and then added, Vern, how many of these have you done exactly? In response, he yanked down his own pants, a motion I'd now come to expect from these people.
Recognize this?
His penis, roughly 8 inches, was tattooed from tip to root. His pubic area was entirely shaved, revealing a face, sort of demonic yet playful in nature. Its mouth was open, his penis formed its tongue. The tattoo which covered it represented as such. Additionally, the shaft and head of the penis was adorned with many piercings, both hoop and stud. It was an extreme sight, and one that would have shocked me had I not seen it dozens of times before. Oh, I exclaimed, you're the dick! Vern smiled large and proud.
That's me.
The dick. Vern's dick, it turned out, was famous for being featured in all 37 installments of the Gangbang series. How did you end up here? I asked.
Well, I'm originally from Hops Hollow. I moved out to the valley to be an actor. Same old story, porn pays better and waiting tables. I figured tats and piercings would help me stand out from the normal crowd of big dicks. I was right, made great cash in the 90s. Internet's killed porn though. I couldn't find enough steady work, even with the old demon dick here. So I moved back home a couple years ago, saw the flyer at a bar, figured fuck it, I'd do a little banging for old time's sake.
How fascinating. Let me give you a little word of advice, newbie, Fat Bob said from his chair. He was still wheezing slightly from the walk inside. You're gonna freeze up in there. Bound to happen. There's a world of difference between watching a bitch take half a dozen cocks in a movie and actually being one of those cocks. Stage fright, you know? I guess so, I replied. The trick for me is learning how to get turned on by all those big dicks. I ain't talking gay shit. I'm talking about training your mind to make your dick hard at the sight of other hard dicks. As an exercise, I like to watch male masturbation videos while I jack off. It's like muscle memory. Now anytime I see a boner, my hand goes right for the pistol. I was again speechless. Vern laughed at my inability to form a response, but then I didn't have to. The lady of the house had arrived. She backed her way in through the double doors. When she turned around, I nearly fell over into Fat Bob. She was simply stunning. Of all the hundreds, if not thousands of porno movies I'd consumed in my second life, I'd never seen a woman with such beauty defiled on film. Not in foo-foo girl lesbian movies, nor boring romantic couples movies, but especially not engaging in something so base and degrading as a gangbang. She was tall as Vern, maybe tall as me, and slight of figure. Almost too thin, but somehow she made it work. Her hair, what little of the natural stuff that was visible, was straight, fair, and blonde with a purple streak through the bangs. The rest was hidden under a huge headband that blossomed back into thick ropes of faux dreadlocks, mostly blonde and black, but with a number of purple locks mixed in to match her outfit, which was eye-catching, to say the least. She wore no shirt, just a black bra and matching mesh fishnet top with the tiniest of micro skirts and knee-high fuzzy boots matching the purple of her hair and makeup, which would have been gaudy if not for how well it pulled out her striking emerald eyes. Those eyes burned with a fierce intelligence, startling in fact for a woman so young. That's the part that had nearly knocked me over, her youth. There was still a roundness to her face. She couldn't have been more than 20 or 21 years old. I observed all of this in seconds. Then I noticed, almost in passing, that she carried a tray of brownies.
Hello, boys.
Her smile radiated a gleeful mischief, as though she was in on some joke that the rest of us weren't yet privy to, and made her all the more beautiful, if that were even possible. She took a brownie off the stack.
I always put something in my stomach before I do this. If I eat you on an empty stomach, I'll get heartburn, something awful.
She giggled at the comment, smirked, and then added,
My name's Estella.
What a profoundly odd thing to say, I thought. In fact, it made me quite uncomfortable. If I eat you on an empty stomach, what in the world did that mean? For one frightening moment, my first life self, the one who loved reading Dickens by firelight, the one who walked daily in the woods hand in hand with my brilliant, beautiful wife, the one who knew better than to drive miles and miles into a foreign town to collude with strange people in strange houses to perform unspeakable acts, rushed back into existence. I panicked. My breathing became sharp and erratic. I stood in a room full of freaks, strangers, all unfazed by each other's stark oddness, the deceptive nature of the creepy little party planner, or the general feeling that the house we stood in was no swinger sanctuary, no open-minded retreat for wealthy aristocrats wanting to steer clear of the public eye. There were no pictures hanging in this room, nor any other signs or clues as to the resident's identity. Who lived here? Who was this woman standing in front of me, 40 years my junior, staring at me with hungry eyes? If I eat you on an empty stomach, I'll get heartburn, something awful? What did that mean? Had Samuel been right to caution me against this adventure? Were these people's intentions truly heinous? I nearly bolted for the door, back to the comforts of the civilized world, back to my mundane, boring little teacher life, back to my dear Susanna to give her the proper graveside mourning she deserved. Then I noticed the young lady looking at the large television set behind me. The bangers had gathered around it and were presently stroking half-hard cocks transfixed on the screen. On it, a woman was in the middle of collecting a dozen sperm deposits in her mouth. As the porno actress swallowed the overflowing stew of DNA in one gulp, Our Lady, Estella, rubbed her tummy and said,
I love watching movies before I fuck. Gets me super wet.
She giggled. I relaxed, exhaling, letting thoughts of malice and discontent drift from my mind. My second life regained control. There was no threat here, only colorful people looking to have some unorthodox fun. I returned my focus to my hostess, Estella, and the coming fun we were about to have. She stepped in front of the TV, grinning at all the exposed cocks. I followed, transfixed.
And what are we doing over here, naughty boys?
She said, accentuating her words with mischief, her tone that of mock chaste.
Put those big hard cocks away and enjoy some of my home cooking.
She sat the brownies down on the small coffee table between her and the television. I drank in her curves and scent with hungry abandon, feeling my own dick pulse and grow rigid in my trousers. Standing next to her, I breathed in her scent. The smell of sex and brownies and cotton candy? Yes, it was stronger on her than the flyer, yet still faint. In fact, now that I thought about it, the whole house had that faint, odd smell to it. Big D hopped off a gaudy flowered love seat, breaking my train of thought. "Let me get 1 or 2 of those," he said, scooping up 5. "These edibles? I could really use a buzz right now. Bunch of stuck-up motherfuckers in this joint." "Edibles?" I asked Vern, who joined Big Daddy at the brownie plate.
"Pot brownies,"
he said, with a hint of a smirk, obviously enjoying my not-so-subtle naivety.
"Of course they are, sweetie,"
Estella said.
Those are homegrown Colombian smokeweed brownies, though. I'd only eat one if I were you.
Why? 'Cause I'm small? Bitch, I smoke all day. I'm OG. I don't give a fuck. He gobbled down 4 of them right then, as if to prove his point. Maxwell reached up from his spot on the adjacent couch and slapped Big D in the back of his head. Have some respect for the lady. Fuck you too, bitch. Big D spat, brownie crumbs raining down on Maxwell's shoes. Who are you calling a bitch, Tiny? Maxwell said, standing and shoving the little man to the floor. The Cum brothers howled with laughter. Kick him in the dick, one of them said. Vern got in between them before any real damage was done.
Now, boys,
our hostess said.
Let's save all that sexy testosterone for my tight little asshole, okay?
That shut everyone up with a quickness. She turned and leaned over the TV, giving us all a view of that asshole as her pitiful excuse of a miniskirt slid up, revealing no panties beneath.
Why don't you all introduce yourselves?
We each stepped forward, murmuring our names to her as she led our hands across her tight frame. Even Big D and Maxwell ceased their squabbling, while Estella worked her way around our group, groping the bulges in our pants, kissing our necks, and generally arousing the primal urge to fuck in all of us. She was good. This wasn't her first rodeo. Vern reached around and popped her bra strap. Maxwell grabbed 2 handfuls of her perky B-cup tits. Tweaking the nipples, Big D yanked her skirt down in one motion. She pulled away, teasing us, expertly taunting us.
Let's take this upstairs, boys, and get the real party started,
she said, taking a dainty little bite off a brownie. We were salivating. Sexual slaves to our mistress. We were under her control. We followed her up 2 sets of spiral stairs. The old house was massive, truly huge. We walked down a long corridor, all of us watching Estella's taut little ass sway back and forth. The only sound was that of Fat Bob's panicked wheezing trailing 20 feet to the rear of our entourage. Estella stopped at the end of the expansive hallway, spun around, and put her hands on her hips. She looked each of us full in the eyes and grinned. That look of intelligence beyond her years gripped me. I wanted her badly. My pulse began to race with lustful intention, and I had yet to lay a single hand on her.
I hope you all like to play dress-up,
she said, that grin turning mischievous again. Fat Bob trotted up behind us, folding chair in hand, clanking against the walls as he waddled. What are we dressing up as, love? Maxwell asked. Pirates? Robin Hood's merry men? One of the Cum brothers added. Ninjas! Big D yelled, clearly stoned off his tiny ass. In response, the door behind Estella swung open. The smell hit me first, but the others soon remarked about it as well. It appeared the source of the mysterious cotton candy smell had been located, and it was, in fact, coming directly from the room in front of us. It would have been a sweet smell, and not entirely unpleasant, had it not been so pungent. Estella walked inside without answering, gesturing for us to follow with a single sultry wave. The answer, it turned out, was obvious upon entering the room. What the fuck kind of bullshit is this? Big D said, surveying the room's bizarre contents. The first item that drew the group's attention in what must have been the huge house's master bedroom was an enormous lump of shaggy purple fur, roughly the size of a medium-sized dog, that sat directly in the middle of the room. But what made the thing so weird, and what caused Big D to cry out and cringe when he saw it, was that the lump had enormous eyes, large pointy ears, and a wide mouth set with many sharp fangs. Upon closer inspection, though, it became clear that the eyes were plastic and the mouth was sewn on. It was a stuffed animal. A bright, day-glow purple, plushy beanbag chair. The rest of the room looked much like the rest of the house, cluttered and very lived in, which matched neither the age nor the demeanor of either the party planner or Estella. What drew our attention next was a totally weird collection of normal-sized plushy animals strapped to the headboard of a king-size bed up against the far wall. There were scores of them, big plushy bears, little plushy cats, there were birds and mice, dogs and lizards, dozens and dozens of stuffed toys, all different shapes, sizes, and colors, all corded one on top of the other against the headboard. On the far side of the room stood Estella and the party planner. They stood next to a long wardrobe rack.
You will each choose a costume. You must wear the costume for the duration of the evening. Under no circumstances are you to remove the costume. Removal of the costume will result in ejection from the party. Do you understand?
The 7 of us stood speechless. The costumes in question were all human-sized plushy animal outfits with oversized heads containing enormous plastic eyes and freakishly wide smiles. Wide enough, I realized, to accommodate a person's face. The arm sleeves on each outfit ended in paw-like gloves with 3 clawed fingers on each paw. The garments continued down into legs with enormous clawed booties. Each furry, neon-colored costume lacked a crotch.
Furry party,
Vern said, finally breaking the stunned silence.
Wicked cool.
While I'd never heard of it before, I did not need any explanation of what the term furry meant. My anticipation, while certainly diminished at the thought of dressing up like a giant toy animal, had not been entirely extinguished. I would still, after all, be participating in my first gangbang, and that, in and of itself, kept me barreling forward towards my strange and unfortunate destiny. The Cum brothers were first up to the rack. They rifled through the costumes, laughing and joking at the ridiculous get-ups. They settled on shaggy, canary-yellow puppy outfits. The heads had long, drooping ears and big oval-shaped eyes suggesting cute sadness. They even had red tongues that hung lazily off the sides of their faces. The brothers then scampered up onto the bed, barking at each other and playfully sniffing each other's rear ends. Maxwell stepped forward next.
How utterly bizarre,
he said, as he methodically picked through the costumes. He chose a fire-red, majestic lion costume. The head was huge, larger than any of the other outfits, and the felt teeth surrounding Maxwell's face made him look like some ancient tribal shaman. The huge shaggy mane hanging across his shoulders and chest was a bright pink, and his paws and booties were oversized as well, with long pink talons. The whole outfit ended in a skinny tail with a fuzzy pink ball at the end. Maxwell mock-roared and beat his chest as he took his place with the Cum brothers. Vern and I were next.
A fucking furry party! This is so awesome! The last time I did one of these, we all took turns running a train on a zebra in full costume. We didn't even know what the bitch looked like till we all busted nuts up her ass. And guess what? It turned out she was the hottest chick at the party.
He laughed.
I love this weird shit, man.
I picked through the costumes. Do I really have to wear one of these?
Don't be a drag, Mr. P. Here, this will fit you perfectly.
He handed me a purple teddy bear head with bulging eyes and a huge smile that suggested it had just told the funniest joke ever and was waiting for a reaction. Reluctantly, I disrobed and put it on. Vern was right. The whole ridiculous suit fits snug. I was now a giant teddy bear with a human face sticking out of its mouth and a human cock swinging between its legs. Utterly ridiculous. I could not help but remember my second life morals: no children and no animals. While no one here was innocent, the irony was not lost on me that I was about to fornicate with a woman young enough to be my granddaughter while dressed as an animal. Vern donned a shaggy brown elephant costume featuring an obnoxious trunk jutting directly out of his forehead area, and we joined the others near the bed. Big D soon came over, balancing the much too large head of an orange hippo atop his own cranium. "You know, that's a lady hippo, D," one of the Cum brothers said, pointing at the gaudy blush across the hippo's fat cheeks and red lipstick across its mouth.
"This was the smallest motherfucker they had, man, damn!"
He put on the suit, which comically hung from his arms. He trailed a good 2.5 feet of legging behind him.
"Bullshit, man! These motherfuckers prejudiced against little people."
"Fat people, too," Bob said, slamming his chair down with an angry thunk. He wore a tall blue eagle head over his own like a tiara. The head barely fit over his bulbous skull like a hat, coming in no way close to covering his face. The costume, obviously, lay discarded at his feet. Our motley crew of degenerate stuffed animal people stood around this way, idly chatting for several minutes. That is, until Miss Estella stepped out from behind the wardrobe. Our chatter fell away as we took in the heavenly sight before us. She had added to her already provocative outfit a series of modifications that struck from my mind the horrific possibility that we would be taking turns butt-fucking a toy zebra. She wore a hot pink teddy bear head over her own, the mouth set in a wide yawn, revealing her magnificent face within. She wore paw gloves up to the wrist, a fuzzy pink belt around her microskirt that ended in a long, thin tail, and shaggy pink leggings that started at the knee and extended down until they attached to a pair of 6-inch heeled boots, which terminated in paw tips with bright purple claws. The party creep dragged that weird beanbag chair to the middle of the floor. Now that I'd seen her outfit, I realized that the dreadful thing looked just like the bear head Estella wore. The most unsettling part about it was that grin of sharp teeth, as though it were in on some joke or privy to some information that the rest of us were not. We all stared at it with apprehension until Stella sat on top of it and said,
"I want 3 dicks in my mouth and 1 in each hand right now."
That was enough to break the trance. The Cum brothers pushed past the rest of us, complying with Estella's request. Big D ran up and jumped on her knee, adding a 3rd cock to her mouth. Maxwell stood off to the left, offering his cadaver dick to her welcoming fist. As she began to stroke him, Maxwell flipped a switch on the belt strap, causing the jelly dildo to vibrate inside his vagina. He moaned softly as Estella's strokes pushed and pulled the fake cock inside of him. Vern punched me softly in the ribs.
"See you on the other side, buddy."
He took Estella's right side, leaving only Fat Bob and I to fondle our dicks in anticipation. Estella rhythmically stroked and sucked back and forth between the 3 cocks in front of her for several minutes, gasping and begging for dick the entire time, working herself up to bigger and better things to come.
"Fat man,"
she said after a while,
"lick my ass. Old dude, come here and get your dick sucked."
Bob abandoned his chair and moved behind the more sinister one occupied by our lovely hostess. He squatted down as much as his girth would allow, made a move to unbuckle her tail belt and skirt. "No!" she said, her annoyance clear, even though she spoke with Big D's enormous limp dick halfway down her throat.
"Leave it on."
Bob complied, lifting instead the furry garments up and out of the way as he feasted on her young asshole with the same vigor and enthusiasm he might have used to attack a gourmet dinner. This made Estella moan even louder. She slowly unleashed Big D's Big D from her mouth. He dropped down to his back and began to lick her pussy as I stepped up to take his spot. She looked at my hard cock.
"Not bad for an old white man."
She grinned and took the whole thing in her mouth with a slight gagging sound. She stuck out her tongue when she reached the base, licking my balls as she smashed her face against my stomach. I gasped. Vern chuckled and lifted his hand for a high five. He smiled wide and mouthed the words, "Holy shit." I obliged, slapping his hand. This was everything I'd hoped it would be, in spite of the silly costumes and decor. She extracted my cock from her gullet and returned to work on the Cum brothers. I noticed that one of the muscle-bound men had a dick that pointed nearly straight up to his navel. While his brother's rod yielded nearly exactly the same length and girth, it suffered from a severe downward curve. This allowed them to cross their members near the tips and seesaw them into Estella's welcome mouth at the same time. We continued in this way for several minutes, eventually changing positions in such a way that each of us received our share of oral pleasure, anal and cunnilingus, and manual stimulation until the room was noticeably warmer, with the smell of sweat and pussy beginning to overpower the odd cotton candy odor. The sound of our ecstasy bounced off the walls, reverberating back to us, fueling our lust. We were, each of us, lost in our private nirvana of flesh. If our cocks truly had faces, in that moment they would have been smiling. Then the weird little creeper broke the spell. I didn't even realize he was still in the room until he spoke.
"Let's move this to the bed, Essie."
Our lover's high interrupted. We all looked over at him standing there, tapping his watch impatiently. He'd been watching us the whole time. Creepy. Estella humphed with annoyance as she leapt up and made her way to the bed. She climbed up onto her hands and knees at the base of that ominous headboard full of little miniature versions of us, staring down in anticipation of the evening's sexual climax. She stuck her ass high in the air, turned to us and said,
"I want a cock in all of my holes."
I loved her commands. She was my general in the army of fucking her silly. The fuzzy men around me were my brothers in arms. Our artillery, our exposed cocks. No shame, no dignity. Our only mission? Fuck our leader senseless. I was first to the bed. I mounted her from behind, cock throbbing from all the foreplay. I was ready to fulfill my biggest sexual fantasy. Vern scooted underneath our hostess lying on his back. Together, we entered her velvety folds. I moved her pink tail aside and penetrated her anus with relative ease. The oral stimulation had loosened her asshole enough for me to get my swollen dickhead inside with very little effort. Estella sucked in a harsh breath as I worked my thickness slowly deeper into her tush. I felt Vernon's cock push into her pussy, the pressure tightening her bunghole around my shaft. As we worked up and down, Estella cried out. I could feel the many rings attached to his wang through the membrane separating her vaginal canal from her anal cavity. It felt marvelous. I was forced to use all of my concentration to keep from blowing my load right then. I took a deep breath and slowed my thrusting. I wanted to savor this moment, needed to savor it. The beast had been craving this for so long. I couldn't spoil it now by busting a nut early like a chump.
"Pull my hair, you geriatric fuck,"
she commanded.
"Stick a cock in my mouth now."
As I yanked on the long blonde locks from beneath her bare head, Maxwell climbed up on the bed, cramming his dead dick down her throat, gag-fucking her until saliva flowed freely from her mouth. Just when I thought I could not hold back my seat any longer, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Big D wanted my spot. Relieved, I stepped off the bed, allowing the little man to take my place. He yanked up his orange sleeves and mounted Estella's prone and waiting ass. "You ready for a chocolate surprise, slut?" he asked, slapping her butt cheek. Fat Bob pushed himself up onto the bed next, causing it to sag visibly to one side. Vern was forced to shift to the side in order to avoid being smothered by Bob's enormous belly fat. Estella worked Bob's tiny penis and balls with her hands while Maxwell punished her face. That's when I noticed it. I was slowly stroking my meat, gazing around the room when my gaze fell onto that unsettling beanbag chair. I'm not sure what caused me to pause on this dreadful thing, or why I scrutinized its features, but I did. And there was something different. Weren't those eyes pointing off to the right before? Wasn't the mouth wide with mocking laughter? Of course not, because now the eyes stared straight ahead toward the bed and the furry gangbang participants. Now the mouth hung slack as if hungry? "You're not getting in there, D. Come on, give us a turn." My concentration was broken. Big D was still struggling to cram his thick, limp cock into Estella's butthole. The Cum brothers were growing impatient. D hopped off the bed without protest. His head hung in shame. He turned away from the group and began to furiously work his pull, cursing the erectile dysfunction under his breath, slapping his bulbous cockhead in anger as the big orange girl hippo head bounced around loose on his own. Verge disengaged as well, leaving the Cum brothers to take their respective places.
"This bitch is on fire,"
my new friend said to me. He was flushed, dripping with sweat, clearly enjoying himself.
"I've never seen a civilian this cock-hungry. Hell, half the porn stars I fucked aren't this into it. Remind me to get this bitch's number. I want to do this again. Mr. P, you listening to me?"
"What?" I said, back to scrutinizing the awful chair. "Oh, yes, she's fantastic. Better than I could have imagined."
"I gotta get back in there, but fuck, I gotta take a piss first."
He grabbed at his ornate penis.
"Hold my place in line, will ya?"
"Sure," I said, not taking my eyes off the chair.
"And don't come too fast, you old fuck."
He laughed and walked away. I did not respond.
"I'm sorry,"
the party creep said, stepping in front of Vern.
"but there's no leaving the room once the party has begun." "The fuck you want me to do, piss in here?"
Vern said, easily sidestepping the squat froggish man. Before he could say another word, Vern was out the door. I took my attention away from the beanbag chair long enough to see that a look of apprehension had crossed the little man's face. He checked his watch again, obviously worried about something. But what? The Cum brothers were pounding Estella's swollen flesh holes. They seesawed back and forth with blinding speed while Maxwell punished the poor girl's mouth. He'd wrapped both hands around her faux dreadlocks and was currently using them like reins to pull her head forward while ramming his big fake cock down the woman's throat. Her eyes watered, causing the purple makeup to smear and run in such a way as to suggest tears of blood running down her pretty face. She gagged and gagged as orgasm after orgasm racked her lithe body. You like that shit, you little teddy bear, huh? Growl for Maxwell. Growl for the big scary lion, bitch. My erection was throbbing. I would not be able to hold back my own orgasm much longer. I was about to cut in on Maxwell for some of that sweet oral action when I chanced one last look over my shoulder. I froze, startled. Genuinely and without question, that creature of a chair had moved forward 4 or 5 feet. There was no doubt something very, very weird was going on. My sexual urges left me. In their place grew unease and fear. This bizarre party was not what it seemed. These people, Estella and her squat companion, were not what they seemed to be. But then what were they? Just then the party planner lurched forward.
It's time, Stella. The moon is right.
I hadn't noticed before, but there was an enormous picture window at the western wall, towering above the bed. The drapes were drawn, and I could see the moon, huge and full, directly through the center of the window, casting its light into the room, lighting up the bangers like a spotlight. Estella pulled Maxwell's cadaver dick out of her mouth.
Everybody get on the bed.
She climbed off the cum brothers and onto her knees.
I want everyone's cock touching my face right now. Fucking come on me. Everybody come all over my fucking face.
Big D jumped up and joined the other 4. Vern had yet to return from the bathroom. But I wouldn't move. I couldn't. Something had changed. The boys took no notice, each of them smacking their wet dicks off Estella's face. She sucked them, stroked them, frantic motions, eager to taste their liquid. Every last one of them was drunk with lust. They didn't see what I saw. Oh God, they didn't hear what I heard. It started so low, I thought it had come from someplace else in the house. The sound, it was like dozens of children singing. It was slow and methodical, like a schoolyard rhyme. I couldn't make out the words yet, only the melody. I didn't realize it was coming from inside the room until I saw them move. The headboard, it came alive. The plushy dolls, the bunnies, the kittens, the puppies, and all the rest. The damn thing started to dance. Why? Why didn't anyone else notice this madness? The toys were somehow alive, and none of these people seemed to care. Fat Bob was the first to come. He leaned back so as to get as much of his belly away and as much of his diminutive cock forward as possible. He furiously tugged away with 2 fingers and a thumb. He stood, pudgy legs spread wide, just behind the crouched Estella, so that when his little pecker shot off, 2 thick, pearly ropes of jism landed cleanly across her forehead. She moaned with delight, crossing her eyes in an attempt to see the splooge adorning her face. Big D was next. He climbed up Bob's expansive stomach and perched above Estella's prone face. He spit on both his hands and began to rhythmically corkscrew them across the purple tip of his giant wang. He closed his eyes in stern concentration. After several strokes, he grunted. Out of his ridiculous cock shot 2 dual streams of thin, milky spunk. They hit the woman directly on the nose and splashed back a little onto her cheek before oozing down onto her open lips. She eagerly licked it away. But something was very wrong. The stuffed animals continued to dance and sing, the melody growing louder. And Estella's face! There was no doubt that it looked amazing as it was continuously splattered with cum rocket blasts, but it was somehow changing. It seemed to sink back further into the mouth of her bare head, to somehow grow dimmer, less defined as Maxwell stepped forward. He yanked, almost violently against his cadaver dick, up and down, left and right, the vibrating dildo buried deep inside his vagina, sounding on the verge of death as he pushed so hard. Then, all at once, as he was overcome with orgasm, he pushed a button at the base of the dead balls attached to his cock. A small cascade of sperm unloaded into Estella's right eye, sealing it shut instantly. That's when the chant of the damnable toys that danced and sang with complete immunity from the people around me grew loud enough to understand.
Moonlight wakes us from our sleep, pulls our thoughts from the ancient deep. Hunger calls, our duty pledged, we spill our seed across your heads, and with our tools your blood be shed. Feed our masters with our own kind. Now is time, our pledge we bind. How could they not hear it? It was so loud now. The cum brothers stepped up, one on either side of Estella's head. The rest of the group stroked their flaccid cocks in anticipation for the grand finale.
Estella too eagerly watched the two big dicks with her one open eye, stroking their shaved balls with her paw hands. The two chiseled hunks matched each other's strokes perfectly. They were artistic geniuses. Estella's messy face, their canvas. Their beautiful cocks shot off at the same time, and yes, it was glorious. Their pearly white man-juice was impossibly thick as it splashed down onto the woman's waiting cheeks and tongue. Blast after blast assaulted her mouth. I counted 7 full spasms, each one arching higher into the air. Consistency so thick, none of the jism splashed off onto the bed. What Estella couldn't catch with her mouth stuck to her face like glue. Even after the initial orgasm had finished, their cocks twitched and dripped globs of goo, which Estella licked away with a delighted grin on her totally slimed face. Only that grin, that face, was set so far back into the mouth of the bear head, impossibly far back. And the singing, now Bob seemed to hear it. Big D and Maxwell turned their attention, finally, to that demoniac headboard, to those things. I felt something move past my leg. I looked down. My God, it was moving! The chair with the face inched forward toward the bed like a damned caterpillar. I staggered backward, back as far as I could, eyes glued to the nonsensical scene before me. Estella's face, it disappeared completely. And that gigantic bear grin, it closed. Those googly eyes, they focused. The fur around her gloved hands, it grew up her arms. It wound around her chest, up her legs, until her entire body was covered in pink fuzz. Fat Bob cried out. He collapsed to the bed, nearly toppling the whole thing over. Clutching the idiotic eagle head atop his own, he yanked at it, screaming in pain as the royal blue fur groped down his forehead across the bow of his nose before finally covering his whole face. Then, oh God, then it opened up its plastic beak and let out a hideous shriek. Big D flopped onto Bob's swollen belly. He scrambled inside the loose fur suit, panic taking over his small body. He got twisted up inside as the empty arms and feet began to snake about and coil in on themselves as though searching for their prey. The orange hippo mouth closed tighter and tighter across the little man's torso until it clamped shut entirely, trapping the poor man half in, half out of its maw. Only his legs, fat cock, and belly were left outside its twisting form. Maxwell screamed in pain and grabbed the enormous lion head around his face. His terrified cries quickly turned into roars, and his face dimmed and then disappeared, leaving only a giant, man-sized stuffed animal in his place. This insanity, this cartoon nightmare reached its crescendo when Estella, now fully consumed by her plushy teddy bear costume, tore the cocks and balls off the Cum brothers with her now sharp-taloned fingers. The brothers, who had similarly succumbed to their own costumed counterparts and now stood as human-sized fuzzy puppy dogs, howled in pain, pawing at their severed privates, each of them spewing forth not blood and gore, but stuffing and little styrofoam balls. Their toy innards shot out with greater intensity and velocity than their human seed had, covering the Estella bear in a white fluffy mess. This seemed, however absurdly, to be the goal, as she feverishly crammed her maniacal smiling face with the stuff, chomping and cooing with a sexual intensity outpacing her previous human efforts. The brothers fell off the bed and were quickly set upon by the beanbag chair thing. It ripped into their exposed genital area like some rabid wolf, tossing more stuffing into the air as it devoured their poofy insides. After only a moment or two, the puppy men lay torn open, flattened out, and clearly dead. Things on the bed were no better. Big D flailed for a few moments longer, then twitched for several more until he finally succumbed to a lack of oxygen. He became stiff and rigid in death, finally achieving the full erection that had so eluded him in life. Fat Bob was not so lucky. His big blue eagle's head, with no ability to move the titanic bulk that housed it, began pecking away at Bob's still human stomach, sending a crimson tide of blood and fat-covered guts into the air. Bob still kicked and thrashed, some parts of him obviously still human and still able to feel pain, the poor bastard. Maxwell, having now completed his bizarre transformation, roared in anger at the sight of his fallen comrades. He made to lunge at the much smaller teddy bear person, still scooping up chunks of stuffing dropped by the Cum brothers. She growled in anger and scrambled to the edge of the bed, brandishing her sharp purple claws at the lion monster. The blazing red lion beast walked backward several steps in order to pounce on his diminutive prey. He stood directly in front of the headboard, full of little plushy animals. Before he could attack, the awful toys yanked out tiny little penises previously hidden by their neon-colored fur and proceeded to ejaculate what, by the look and smell of it, could have only been cotton candy. The bright pink stuff shot out of their dozens of little bodies with such force, Maxwell was thrown to his hands and knees onto the bed. Thick wisps of black smoke rose from his form as agonizing yelps escaped from his razor-sharp maw, now rendered useless as the steady stream of stuffed animal ejaculate quickly turned his body into an oozy paste. The smell was just dreadful, nauseating even, like burning plastic and yet somehow organic and rotten. Just as quickly as it had burned through the poor man-beast, the stuff stopped melting, seemingly to go inert very quickly. Already the pile of pink gunk that had just been Maxwell looked like a pile of soft-serve strawberry ice cream. The Estella bear sure seemed to think so. Her googly eyes grew even wider, and she cooed out in childish delight, scooping heaping handfuls of the steaming slush into her oversized mouth. What was left of the noxious-smelling goop, the leftover innards of the Cum brothers, and the gory remains of Fat Bob sloughed off the bed into the waiting mouth of the beanbag beast. All the while those awful little toys sang their awful song.
Moonlight wakes us from our sleep, pulls our thoughts from the ancient deep. Hunger calls, our duty pledged, we spill our seed across your heads. And with our tools your blood be shed, feed our masters with our own kind. Now is time, our pledge we bind. I describe all of these impossible, ridiculous things with a detached factuality because a large part of me had already accepted the possibility that I had simply gone mad. Some previously undiagnosed dementia must have overtaken me, a fast-moving Alzheimer's or a stroke mid-fuck. I didn't know, but a tiny part of my mind was still there, still in that room, seeing what I saw, smelling that rotten cotton candy stench. Call it a primal urge for self-preservation, I honestly do not know what kept me moving. But at that moment, as Estella played in the puddle of goo that had so recently been my comrades in fuck, I snapped out of my delirious haze. I tore the costumed head and suit from my body, casting it across the room. As soon as it was exposed to the moonlight, it began to flail and constrict as if blindly groping for a body to inhabit. Naked and feeling extremely vulnerable, I looked over to the party planner who had, all this time, remained still and unfazed, passively watching the nightmarish events with no more emotion than if he'd been watching paint dry. "Please," I said, finding my voice, "please help me." "Mr. Pillinghast,"
he said, seemingly startled to see me.
"I'd forgotten you were even here. Come, join the fun. You need to put your suit back on right now. My daughter is awfully hungry. We can only eat the true flesh once a month. As you can see, she has quite the appetite. She got that from her mother after she ate her."
Had he said daughter?
"Daddy,"
Estella Bear said from the gloopy mess of a bed.
"come eat with me."
The party planner grinned as he removed his shirt and pants. He grabbed a costume off the rack and strode into the moonlight, turning to face me, donning his own teddy bear costume. As soon as he fastened the neck of the big bear head to the rest of the suit, it grew around him, an act so effortless there is no doubt it had been performed countless times before. His gigantic plastic eyes focused on me. Then he charged, roaring. His sharp teeth bore as he came right for me. I did the only thing I could do, and it was only by chance or dumb luck that it saved my life. As the enormous plushy beast came forward, I dove to my left behind the closest structure in the room, the wardrobe rack. He hit me just as I'd cleared the costumes, knocking the entire thing over onto me, his crushing weight pinning me to the floor. Terrified, I squeezed my eyes shut and waited for the pain, but it never came. Instead, the monster, whose furry face was mere inches from mine, whose breath smelled sweet like candy, grunted and wheezed. When I opened my eyes, they were staring directly into his, which were now unfocused, confused, and rolling into the back of his head. I pushed away, forcing myself from the twisted-up rack and pile of costumes, which, blessedly, lay outside the reach of the moonlight. It was then that I noticed the stuffing flowing from the creature's stomach. He had somehow impaled himself on the bars of the rack as he fell onto them in his attempt to get to me. I wasn't the only one to take notice either. The beanbag beast saw the wound as well. Estella Bear cried out,
"No, don't eat Daddy Bear!"
But it was too late. The thing bounced up and pounced on Daddy Bear, savagely tearing into the wound, ripping free his entire lower half, leaving him in 2 ragged pieces. Daddy Bear flailed, trying in vain to push the stuffing back into his trunk, even as the beast ate it from his paws. Estella Bear leapt off the bed.
"Daddy!"
She rushed to his side, but he was far too gone to even notice. His mouth lay open, his pink velvety tongue lolled to one side. Estella began to sob.
"You!"
she said, glaring at me.
"This is all your fault! You're just meat! Why couldn't you die like everyone else?"
Then her eyes drifted to the pile of fluffy whiteness and styrofoam balls oozing out of her father's stomach.
"I'll kill you,"
she said, but without much conviction. She plunged her paws into the mess.
"Kill you for this."
Then she buried her snout into her father's dying body and ate his insides. I slowly pushed myself up the wall. The pair of cartoonish monsters continued to eat the third one alive as I scooted myself across the room, leaning heavily into the wall. My legs were weak. My heart raced. I was sure, finally, that I'd gone mad. My breath came in shallow gasps, with short fits of blubbering and what may have been laughter as I felt my mind become unhinged. It was then that I looked back at the awful headboard. The little creatures there had finally stopped singing and dancing. Now they writhed, trying to pull free from their binding, crying out with a multitude of childish voices, "Feed us! Please let us down! It's our turn to eat! We're so hungry! We need the true flesh!" None of this absurdity could be real. Teddy bears did not come alive under a full moon and eat each other's stuffing. I turned to walk out the door, to return to my normal life, my first life. If that was still even possible, if there was even a life left to return to after what I'd seen and done over the course of these few months. The beast inside me, finally, had been satiated, defeated, silenced. Best to forget about all this teddy bear nonsense. Best to leave it be and wait for the next delusional episode and the next until I was no longer able to function under my own care, until I was put in the care of some nice doctors and nurses who would see me through these trying times of my mentally ill twilight years. No, this wasn't real. This was nonsense. Pure nonsense. But another giant plushy monster blocked the path of my escape. I cried out and flinched away, but when I looked again, I saw a human face inside the jaws of the monster that looked as frightened as my own must have. Vern, still human, still in his ridiculous outfit. He stood, frozen, horrified, and the horror was enough to settle my own nerves and make my mind right. If he saw it too, then as nonsensical as this horror show was, it was also very real. Which meant the danger was real. We had to escape.
Is that, did they really, is that,
he stammered, clearly in shock. Yes, damn it, I said, pushing him out the door. How much did you see? I looked over my shoulder. The monsters glared at me but made no move to follow. There was still much left to eat. I closed the door behind me.
I saw it all. I was coming back from the bathroom, and, oh God, they were dancing and singing and eating each other, and oh God, oh my God.
Yes, I said. Yes, I know. All right, it's all right. What happened in there was awful. But if we're going to get out of this, I'm going to need you to focus. I need you to clear your head. He nodded, taking a deep breath. We took off down the long hallway toward the stairs. I passed a long open window and froze. I leapt back across the shaft of moonlight blazing through the opening. Stop, I yelled, pushing Vern back just before the light touched him. Take that God-cursed thing off, man. Are you insane? He looked at me, dumbfounded, then tore the brown furry elephant costume off and cast it to the ground, revolted, as if he'd completely forgotten he'd even been wearing it. Now, totally naked, we both made for the stairs. Just as we rounded them, the door to the room we'd just left exploded. The now snarling, drooling beanbag beast charged forward, hopping along hideously down the hallway toward us. Estella Bear quickly followed. "Humans," she sang, "where are you?" We bolted down the remaining steps, cocks bouncing in the wind. With Vern in the lead, we turned left down a narrow hallway and through a set of French doors. This was not the way out. We were back in the parlor at the rear of the house. We heard the hideous clomping of the furry monsters as they descended the stairs. Retreating back the way we'd come was impossible. We had to hide. "In there!" I cried, pointing at a small door at the back of the room. We dashed through into an adjacent powder room. I closed the door. "Quiet now," I said, listening for any signs that we were pursued. Nothing. We were safe for the moment. Then Vern screamed. I whipped around, ready to clock him, when I saw them. An old man and woman, old enough to be my parents, the obvious owners of the house, dead. Piled around them pictures of themselves and their families, pictures that would have given the monster's trap away had they left them hanging in the house. They were shoved into the corner of the tiny room, their hands bound behind their backs, their throats slit. There was no smell to them, nor decay to their bodies. They couldn't have been dead more than a day. Maybe they'd even been killed just before our arrival. It was all starting to make sense, albeit weird, twisted, impossible sense, but sense nonetheless. The flyers, the discreet phone calls, the invasive questions, even the beat-up RV made sense. These monsters preyed on the perversions of lonely men, men with no families, no one to miss them if they never came back from their party. How many times, in how many small secluded towns, had Estella and her father fucked and then eaten a group of unsuspecting perverts?
"Werewolves,"
Vernon murmured, ending my train of thought. He slid down to the floor, cradling his knees to his chest. He visibly shook. "What?" I whispered, straining to hear the whereabouts of the monsters, terrified they'd hear my bewildered companion cry out.
"Haven't you read stories about werewolves? Lycanths?"
"No," I said. I've led a rather sheltered life."
"Some stories claim that Native Americans would lather themselves with special salves and oils under the full moon. They would wear the skinned hides of wolves and transform, shapeshift into beasts and run wild in the night."
"Those things aren't wolves, Vern."
"No, they're fucking not,"
he said, sobbing.
"They're fucking stuffed animals. But I don't know how else to explain what the fuck is going on here, man. I'm fucking losing my shit."
He started to rock back and forth, sobbing uncontrollably.
"I don't want to fucking die, man."
"Shut your fucking mouth, man, and maybe we won't." But it was too late. The smell hit first, turning my stomach. The smell of cotton candy, now forever associated with violence and with death.
"Here, little humans,"
Estella Bear called from just outside the parlor.
"I hear you."
I looked around the room for something, anything to defend myself. Vern remained on the floor, useless. Just as I heard the hideous clomp, clomp, clomp of Estella's pet beast chair entering the parlor, I spotted what was surely my only means of defense. A bag of old golf clubs propped up next to the corpses of the true owners of the house.
"I smell your fear, humans. I know you're in here." "She's gonna fucking get us, man. She knows we're fucking in here."
Vern hissed from the floor, pouring sweat. I could smell piss. He'd wet himself. "Shut up!" I barked, snatching the 2 largest clubs from the bag. I handed one to Vern and braced myself for the coming attack. Vern dropped the club, oblivious.
"We can't fucking fight monsters. We're fucking dead, man. Dead, dead, dead."
The door crashed open. Before I could put myself between the beasts and the gibbering man on the floor, they were on him. The bag beast chomped through Vern's writhing legs, and Estella Bear jumped onto his chest, tearing into his ribcage with her razor-sharp purple talons. His screams were awful but short-lived. They made quick work of him. I took a deep breath, a breath of desperation. set my mouth, and swung for the fences, praying my first blow would find a home. It did. I swung the club as hard as I could in an upward motion, connecting solidly with Estella's left eyeball, shattering the plastic instantly, sending the loose iris into the air. She wailed in pain, grabbing her gaping eye hole, toppling backwards over the bag beast, who was now devouring the trunk of Vernon's decimated corpse. I swung again, downward this time, both hands high above my head, burying the club into the top of the beast. When I wrenched it free, stuffing and styrofoam balls exploded into the air like confetti. Estella was back on her feet, ruined eyeball dangling from a black string, stuffing pouring from the wound. The two monsters roared, eyes crazed, mouths full of drool and fangs. They turned on each other, ripping one another to shreds. I ducked back, willing myself small enough to avoid a stray fang or claw. Soon, the tiny room was so full of wet, stinking fur, stuffing, and tiny packing balls that I could not see nor hear my own terrified shrieks over the guttural growls and screams coming from the two beasts. And then it was over. I opened my eyes. I'd survived the chaos. As the shredded, plushy flesh settled to the ground, I saw that the chair monster had been completely torn apart. Its wide mouth was ripped totally across, leaving the beast in two sections. A top half, containing its eyes, ears, and upper teeth, lay upside down next to the rest of it, like a discarded trash can lid. As I cautiously stepped over the corpse, my stomach turned as I saw the remains of Vern's tattooed cock jutting up from the bowel of the thing. Estella fared no better. She lay limbless next to the beanbag corpse. All four of her appendages lay strewn about. Her snout had been sliced free, leaving a gaping wound of stuffing where most of her bare face should have been. But she was not dead. She wriggled her stumps, staring into my eyes with her one remaining, a look of cold hatred in the huge plastic thing. One more swing of my club put an end to that. I wiped the sweat from my brow, turned to beat a hasty retreat, and was stopped dead in my tracks. There, standing in the parlor, was a tiny miniature version of Estella, a little pink and purple teddy bear no more than a foot tall. And then there was a second, this one a giraffe. A third waddled into view, a sheep. They'd broken loose from the headboard. Just let me pass, and I ducked just in time to avoid 3 blasts of acidic cotton candy cum. The little monsters screamed and charged, sounding like angry children. I clubbed the first one clearly across the room. It exploded upon impact against the far wall, stuffing shooting out into the air like snow. I jumped clear of the other two, who rushed Estella's corpse, diving fully inside of her wrecked body, gorging themselves on her guts. More little monsters attacked as I fled the parlor. I easily batted them away with my club or kicked them as I ran. Their chatter was everywhere. The house was full of the dreadful nightmare things, like a bad acid trip inside a grade school cafeteria. The ones I smashed were set upon instantly by the others, giving me enough time to work my way to the front of the house and through the front door. I leapt into my car, never more grateful that I kept a spare ignition key in my glove box. The tiny monsters flooded out of the door after me, giggling and shouting. I mashed my accelerator and left that cursed farmhouse behind me. I drove home in stunned silence. What else was I to do? Call the cops and tell them that a gang of nomadic cannibal were-teddy bears had savagely murdered a group of destitute gangbangers? No. Best to forget that bizarre night had ever happened. Best to return to whatever normalcy I could while I still had my health. I am an old man. I have no business sticking my nose into things like that. In the first few days after the nightmare, I was able to do just that. Return to the normal life of an old widower. I threw out all of my porno, cleaned my house, deleted Samuel's number from my phone, eventually blocking it as he called and texted constantly when I did not show up at hottest topics after the encounter. I placed a single picture of Susanna above the mantel in my den, a reminder of who I truly was and what I truly lost. I bought that dog, the one all the widowers are supposed to buy when their beloved spouse dies. I planted that garden, Much to the delight of old Mrs. Masters, the old Mr. P was back. I was already making plans to return to teaching. My first life had returned, resurrected, a phoenix raised from the ashes of monster teddy bears. But that was a lie. It was not the end. The first changes I noticed while out planting peppers with Mrs. Masters, listening dutifully to her idle gossip about our neighbors. It was the way the light hit, I assured myself, that caused the hair on my arms to look slightly purple. Then my fingernails softened and took on a lavender texture, soft and malleable. A vitamin deficiency, no doubt. A week after the absurd events in Hops Hollow, I felt a change in my eyeballs, as though the eye itself had begun to stiffen or harden, while the iris came loose and sort of jiggled about. For this, I had no explanation. Then there was the hunger, insatiable. I bought 10 pounds of steak, grilling it at first, then taking it rare, and finally raw. The hunger was not abated. I ate the dog, fur and all. Then I ate Mrs. Masters, strangling her right under the picture of Susanna in the den. My first life was gone forever, as was my second. This is my third life. There is no turning back. I accept who I am now, and, however absurd, what I am. I told you girls at the beginning of this letter that my story was not a confession. I am not ashamed of what I've done. You see, I went back. I went back to the farmhouse, and I took those pelts, and I loaded that RV with the little ones. They turned back into toys in the sunlight. Did you know that? The hunger is insatiable. It's all I can think about. I must feed on the true meat, taste the true flesh. The moon should be up now. If I've timed this right, the full moon, girls. And with the full moon will come my first full change, my first true meal. Seneca let the final page of the manuscript fall to the ground. She looked out the window into the huge full face of the moon, its light bathing the entire classroom. She felt the teddy bear head grow tight across her face as the childlike chanting began. The smell of cotton candy and the screams of her dying classmates filled the night air.